This is WFNP 88.7 Rosendale. Welcome to Curiosities of the Cosmos. I'm your host, Allyson Sheneman. Today I've brought on Joe Cartolano to talk about art education.
Welcome to Curiosities of the Cosmos with Allyson Sheneman. My guest today is Joe Cartolano, a junior in art education at SUNY New Paltz. He loves art and works as an RA. He is also, in his own words, a wannabe science nerd. Joe, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. For our listeners, Joe is a good friend of mine. We were once classmates, one time. And he has the most infectious joy and energy. I am so excited to have him as a guest on the show today. So thank you for coming on and taking the time out of your schedule to be here.
I wouldn't miss it. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So first, I just want to kind of open up the conversation about like art and science. Typically, I found, at least in my experience, that art and science have been kind of set in opposition to one another. So I'm kind of curious as to what your experience is with that and whether you feel that distinction is naturally occurring or just kind of this like societal perspective.
That's a great question. Yeah, I think that art and science always sort of get separated, which I find to be unfortunate. I think that there's so much that we can learn. And I think that, especially like for me, I'm a visual learner. And I think that a lot of science, if it's taught in different visual ways, could be a really wonderful way for students and teachers to sort of create like engaging curriculum. I know STEAM is the big word.
Yes.
Now they've added, or STEM is the big word, and now they have STEAM where they add art to it, which I think is exciting.
Yeah.
I always find it fun where, like, if you're in, like, a different, like, textbook, you'll see the pictures of, like, the models of the human body or any of that. That's art. I was just in a biology classroom, and she brought out the big model of the cell. That's art, too. I think it's always exciting to see the different ways that art can be in the science room. So, yeah.
Yeah, totally. I feel like also something that I've noticed is in talking about different mediums that are used in art, that I don't know if in your classes it's something that's really like talked about or just kind of like something somebody once discovered and now we just kind of take for granted maybe. But thinking about how, I know you've worked with a lot of different like materials and mediums, how maybe biology is required to talk about woodworking and how chemistry is required for like metal and maybe like physics for sculpture, things like that, and what your experience maybe has been like with talking about those different mediums within those classroom settings.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. I'm really appreciative. I'm taking a welding class right now,
Awesome.
Which is really fun. But we're learning about, fire. And fire isn't just something that happens out of nowhere. It has to start from something. And my welding professor, he took us through the steps of almost just like evolution as with humans and with fire. Like, we started out just making a couple, like a little campfire to cook some meat, and now we use gases, and now we use different things to like have these super cool torches that we use to melt metal, and all the like the history behind that. It's taken a while to get where we are, and it's always exciting to see.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I noticed it a lot too. I've taken exactly one art class in my time in college, and it was ceramics. Which I had some experience working with in art classes when I was really little. And it was something I was trying to like get back into. And I didn't realize the amount of science that was really talked about in that classroom setting. We talked a lot about like what different materials are required to make different glazes. And it was like really stepping into a chemistry lab, going into that glaze room. So it's really fascinating to me how like I feel like artists maybe are sometimes more aware of how science interacts with their work than maybe the other way around for like a scientist to be as aware of the art that is required to learn the subject that they learned and in the models that they're using and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you go into the ceramic studio at SUNY New Paltz, the college that we go to, in the glaze room, they have a huge periodic table up on the wall because you're using cobalt, you're using all of these different like elements to create different colored glazes, and just the firing of clay it's a chemical reaction because you can't, like, while you're making the clay when it's wet, and that's just you're changing it just a little bit, but when you put it in the kiln, it like changes as like you can't get clay back from once it's out of the kiln. So it's super exciting. It's really like exciting to me as an artist to sort of like look back and be almost like thank you to my teachers in high school, because a lot of the stuff that I use in art comes from like a very rounded curriculum, and especially in the science, like a lot of the things that I learned from there, I'm using in the art world, which is so exciting. I wanted to bring up, there's this really cool artist, Nathalie Myback, and she uses like this really cool 3D model of weather systems, and she'll weave it out of baskets, and she'll like cut like different sheets of paper for like clouds and stuff, and these models look so crazy and so cool. It's like nothing you've ever seen before in like science textbooks or something. And when she goes to like conferences with like different scientists or like meteorologists, they're able to see these models that are totally these artistic and crazy like pieces and be like, oh, like, I understand this. We're going to have a storm next week, because she does it like daily to track the weather in certain spots of the world. It's so exciting.
That is awesome. What a like fascinating way too of like taking a medium that maybe doesn't naturally lend itself to somebody thinking about like weather patterns and stuff, and to turn it into something that's really a tool more than anything else, like for science. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Do you feel in doing art education specifically that in like thinking about how you're going to be running your classroom and maybe the types of opinions and beliefs and thoughts that you want to like have your students start forming, that would be like that's making science really a part of art, and having the two intersect is going to be like an important conversation? Is that something that you talk about in your classes? Is it something that like you're very like conscious and aware of going into art education?
Ooh, that's a great question. Oh wow. I think as an art teacher, it excites me because I think that art is everything. I don't think that art can be categorized as just like painting or just like drawing. Like, I think art is movement. Art is like everything. Like you could narrow down everything to art, music, you name it. But I think that what excites me about the idea of having like science in the art is that we have this opportunity as educators to interact with like fellow teachers and fellow classes and create like they call it, we talk about it all the time, co-curricular teaching, where you're working with like most of the time I remember at my high school we did like English and social studies, because you know it's pretty similar stuff. If you do like a book from World War II, you get the history aspect and the art aspect, but like I want to like really delve into that and be like, what if we made science and art together? What if we had students making models of a cell in biology class, because that's what like that's the best way we can remember it. I want to be, as a teacher, I would always want to do like different projects that engage with like my fellow like coworkers. I've started collecting like old metal spoons that have silver in them, and I want to like work with my chemistry teacher and melt them all down into like a silver bar so I could remake them into something else, because art is chemistry, and the way that like we get our materials didn't just come from nowhere. Like, we have a lot of science behind what we make. So
yeah, that's so awesome. I feel like when I think back to my experience coming into science in like elementary school, middle school, I feel like so much of it was because the curriculum was presented to me in a way, which I'm so appreciative for, in a way that was so like tactile. And so like my very first like science project that I really remember doing was making little models out of styrofoam balls of Jupiter's moons. Yeah. And so I feel like that was one of the first moments that I was like, oh, this is what I want to do for a living.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so thinking back on it now, I'm like, I don't know that I would have cared so much for the material, at least not at that age, if it weren't for the fact that I got to make art projects out of it, really. Yeah, that's so cool.
It's always so exciting to see like what different projects. I remember we had like the little, like you make like a little circuit, And
oh, yes.
yeah, you would make like a little circuit that would like connect to a tiny little light bulb. And you would see students like after they finish like with like the lab portion of it, they'll experiment with the lights and see how they can interact with them and make different lights light up and do different patterns of it. And it's just like that sort of like backing behind science creates so much cool art, and it gets students so excited, which is so awesome.
And it's so practical, because that like making the light with the circuits, I just did. So I'm taking, it's not really a class so much as it is just like a little extra thing that I like don't get any credits for. I just do it because it's fun. Through our physics department, where you learn how to like solder and stuff like that. And the first step for that class is to make a complete circuit and have the little light up. And so it's not just something that you can do with younger students who can then maybe become really interested in this thing and then want to perhaps like pursue that in some kind of like career aspect or something. But it's also like, especially for older students then, learning how to solder and learning how to make those circuits connect and stuff. I mean, you're training people to be able to become electricians and engineers and architects and all these other things also.
Yeah, that's something I find so important about art, and especially with school right now. I think that we're teaching kids a lot of different facts, a lot of ways to memorize, a lot of ways to sort of become very scholarly, and I think that's so important. But we're losing that like practical like fact. Like I remember home ec class, we don't really have that anymore. Yeah, but there's so many like skills, like learning how to use a screwdriver, learning how to sew something. Like all of these different skills play such an important part in who we are as people. And it's just such a shame that like we don't get as much opportunity to like learn about how to do something that might make the next great electrician. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, totally. Well, that was a wonderful conversation about like art and education and all these things. And I'm going to transition us now to our first segment.
Sure.
So the first segment we have on the show is called Should We Be More Worried About?, which is gathered from years of various types of public science communication, where engaging with the public about scientific concepts and ideas, they tend to have a lot of questions about things that they should maybe be nervous about, things that might make them anxious hearing about, but maybe not fully understanding. And so I've gathered all of these different questions. I'm going to have you, as my guest, address one of them. So the question for you is, should we be more worried about separating art and science in school?
Ooh, I really do think that that's something that we should be more worried about. I think it's really important that we keep art and science together, because I think just in terms of the way that each student learns, nobody learns the same way. Every student is going to absorb material differently, and what might work for one student might not work for the student next to them. And I think it's so important that we offer different ways to get students to learn. So if a student doesn't learn from like taking a test and memorizing notes, maybe they might learn from making a project about it. And even just remember like the little science fairs that you had in like elementary school. Yeah. That's art too. I think those are a great way to learn, a different way to display the knowledge you've learned. And if we lose that, we're losing so much exciting ways to get kids engaged. So yeah.
No, that's a great point too. And though I kind of already mentioned this, that idea of it's not just teaching them the science itself, because I tended to find, especially in my work as a tutor at an after-school center, I tended to find that the students would say, like, why do I have to learn this math? Why do I have to learn this science? I'm not going to use it in my day-to-day life. I have a calculator in my pocket now. And I tended to just respond to that with, like, it's still important for you to learn this, like, way of thinking. Like, it's creating these different connections in your brain. It's good to prep you to be able to use that in real-life applications, even if it's not doing this one specific problem. It's teaching you how to problem solve, all these other things. And so I tend to try to think of things too as though I was talking to one of those kids where they're saying, well, why do I have to learn this anyway? Why do I have to build a model of the cell? I'm not going to become a biologist. And to me, like, it's still, in doing those science fairs and stuff, if you ever in your adult life, for science, for business, for any career, have to go to a conference, that's what that is. You make a poster, you stand in front of the poster, and you talk about it.
Right.
And so even if it's not maybe the same like arts and crafts, putting it together with like glue sticks and cutting out paper and stuff, the idea of building a poster and being able to stand in front of it, talk about it, and have somebody come up to you kind of judging it, or not being a judge, but just like your teacher, your classmates, and having to explain concepts to them. And like, again, it brings out that like teaching is the best way to learn something. And there's like a million things that skill or that event teaches you.
Yeah, and something I always think is in a different realm of art rather than physical is performative art. And I think that there's so much that students can learn from presenting and like doing a performance, and maybe if you do, I don't know, a show in high school, that might help you learn and improve your public speaking skills, so that when you're presenting at a conference, you might be a little bit more confident. You might be a little bit more aware of how to enunciate, how to do different things that'll get people more engaged with science, even though it's a basis of art performing that got you there.
Yeah, totally. I think that's something that I notice a lot too in scientists, is that there isn't an emphasis at a college level to be really confident public speakers. There's some opportunity, at least at our school, to learn how to present a little and to have to give presentations. But there really isn't a huge emphasis on making sure that communication is a part of your education. And I feel like a part of me also wonders then if that is why science kind of as a field is a little less trusted now than it has been when science communication was a more important part of the field. And that maybe now we aren't training people to be good science communicators, and therefore when they try to communicate science, it's easier to be skeptical of it or that kind of thing. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I feel like it's so hard now to be like, like even just getting like knowledge from like a physical scientist. I feel like I've been reading research articles, but like it doesn't really come in the form of like the way that I always find trusting is like person-to-person interaction.
Totally.
And like I'll read a research article and sometimes I'm like, that's what the higher ups are saying, like because it's so hard. I find it so difficult to relate to something without like a person like really being able to like talk and like get me to understand it. So I find it's so important to have that.
Totally. And I think a part of that too is because there is now, and maybe this is not that new or different than how it has been historically, but maybe just that we're more aware of it, that there's a lot of financial contribution factors that changes how trustworthy science becomes. And so hearing you say that, I'm like a part of me wants to go, no, I write science papers. When you read them, I want you to go, that's awesome. That's so true. Like that's a thing I didn't know before, and I'm so glad to know it. But I also recognize that even myself reading science papers, I sit there and I go, who funded this?
Right.
Where is this coming from? How trustworthy is this source? Like, because even though it's published and it's peer reviewed or it's this or it's that, these titles that used to mean 100% trust and certainty in this thing, you still have to be a little skeptical.
Right.
And I think that can sometimes get blown out of proportion when maybe though I think we should be skeptical pretty much all the time, maybe when we should trust something, that we're still inclined to be like, but do we know for sure? Like,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always so interesting. This point brings me back to art a little bit, because it's really interesting to see how art is made when somebody else has a say on what they want created, whether it be a company, whether it be you're doing a commission, whatever it may be. It has an influence versus when you see an artist who just works as an individual and they're just telling their own story about their work, their own like meaning behind it. It comes across as a lot more authentic. It comes across as a lot more just like meaningful versus when you can almost tell that there's a little bit of, is this really the whole story,
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you for a wonderful conversation. I hate to interrupt right here, but we do have to take a short break, and we will be right back. All right, welcome back to WFNP 88.7 The Edge, Rosendale. This is continuing with Curiosities of the Cosmos. I'm your host, Allyson Sheneman, and I am joined by Joe Cartolano, a junior and student of art education at SUNY New Paltz. So we just had a wonderful conversation about art and science and education and how they're all kind of one field and a bunch of fields. And we're going to continue now with some more on color.
Ooh.
So I have prepped a small science lesson of sorts. And I figure you as an art educator could maybe help me out a little with the education aspect of this and the like science communication side of things.
Sure.
So I'm going to give you a little lesson on color, light, all of those things. Can you give me a little bit of maybe your starting out point, like what you know about light and color?
Okay. Well, it's been a while since I've been in a science class.
That's okay. This is a safe space to learn.
Whew, yes. So important. I think I know that as something about with light, it depending on its wavelength. I remember seeing the diagrams of the really, really long waves and then the really, really short waves.
Yep.
Those wavelengths make for a different color. There you go. Yeah.
I did bring a little handy dandy electromagnetic spectrum in my notes if anybody was interested.
But those are always so interesting because I know at a certain point we stop seeing colors, right?
Yes. Yeah. All right. That's a wonderful jumping off point for me and a great place to start out. So when we're thinking about light and color, they really are kind of the same thing, right? So light exists in particles called photons, right? And those photons can have a bunch of different properties to them, right? So particularly we classify them in terms of their energy, frequency, and wavelength. Mm-hmm. So when we think about the electromagnetic spectrum, which is what you're thinking about when you're thinking about the wave that's drawn out, and sometimes it's shorter and sometimes it's longer, and there's normally a section of it that they'll carve out and then zoom in on, and it's like a rainbow. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's our electromagnetic spectrum, which is just all of the different wavelengths and frequencies and energies that light can have. Something important to note in saying that is that while the energy or frequency or wavelength can change in light, the speed of light doesn't change.
That's the constant.
That's constant.
Got it.
Yes. So when we think about the lines that are really close together versus really spread out, they're still going the same speed. There's just other things about them that are different. So something also cool to note is that only about 0.0035% of the whole spectrum is visible to us.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, we're missing out on so many colors.
So much.
Oh.
So really we only see the small sliver. And so anything that you've seen that draws out a diagram of, it goes from gamma rays all the way over to radio waves, and there's a little visible light part in the middle. It's definitely smaller than what you've seen it drawn out to be. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing a really small portion of what a photon can look like, right? So our eyes perceive color through specialized cells within our eyes, and they're called cones. If you've ever heard of rods and cones in your eyes, is that?
I might have seen a diagram at the eye doctor, but not much else.
Gotcha. Okay. So this is the cool biology side of this to me, and I love specifically talking about light and eyes because it combines astronomy and bio so much. So there's specialized cells in your eyes. They're called cones. You have cones and rods. Rods are sensitive to different levels of light, whereas cones are sensitive to the wavelength of light. So the rods in your eyes will tell you whether it's dark or bright in a room, whereas cones will tell you that thing is red or that thing is blue.
Got it.
Right? Which is also why, not to keep throwing little fun facts at you, but these are just so fascinating to me, and I know you're a wannabe science nerd, so you'll appreciate the fun facts. That when it is dark, your like night vision is mostly black and white, because in order to get the cones to start perceiving color, it requires that the rods are kind of like overflowing in a way. Oh. So when your rods are identifying that there's a lot of light coming in, it allows for your cones to start registering color.
Interesting.
So if you ever like at like 2 a.m, you like wake up and you're like, what time is it? What year is it? And you look around your room and everything's like black and white looking. It's because there's not enough light for your eyes to dedicate to caring about color. Because what does it matter what color it is? You just need to know if it's there or not, right?
Whoa,
yeah,
that's
awesome?
crazy.
So yeah, evolutionarily, it made sense for us because it matters more if something's right in front of you or if something exists around you at all to be able to perceive it, then it matters what color that thing might be when there's not enough light to dedicate to both, right? So that's a little quirky thing about the way that our eyes work. So again, cones are the ones that like perceive color. They send a signal to your brain, which is how you process that it's a color and that's what you're seeing. But color perception, as I think you probably know more about as an artist, is influenced by a lot of different factors. So it's not like you just see a color and that is the thing that it is. And this is more like color theory. Is that something that you're maybe familiar with?
I took one color theory class, so a
whole
little bit.
Class? You definitely know more on it than I do then. But it's based on a bunch of different factors. It can be slight differences in cone sensitivity in specific individuals. And obviously there's also like losing or not having specific cones that might register certain colors and being colorblind, that kind of concept. Mm-hmm. It can be like cognitive biases. So it's like whether your like brain actually registers certain colors a specific way. And so that's more when you think about optical illusions. It tends to be more that your brain isn't registering it right, even though your eyes are getting the right signal. Mm-hmm. So if you see two colors next to each other and they don't look like they're the same, but it actually is, and they'll show you. Yeah, that's more of like a cognitive bias of your brain.
Got it.
And they're also influenced by cultural factors. So another little fun fact for you is that quote unquote orange as a color didn't exist until the 17th century. So it actually, I mean, it did exist in nature, right? And oranges such as the fruit did exist at the time. But the word orange wasn't used to describe that specific color until the 17th century. And up until then, they just referred to it as like a hue between red and yellow, the way that we might think of like teal or something like that.
Interesting.
Right?
Because it's such a stark like difference between the colors. You'd think that they would have done it sooner, but that's cool.
Yeah. So the way that we might think of like a teal as being more like, or like red orange mm-hmm. instead of its own color, or like a green blue instead of
that's crazy. I mean, you'd be like missing half the color wheel then if you took out orange.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating? It's like such a core part of our understanding of color now, to be like a sixth of the like traditional colors. And yet it wasn't referred to as that. It was just kind of like, it was thought of obviously and still used, but just as this like in-between color.
That's
rather than
crazy.
Its own color. So I know I just threw like a million things at you about light and color and how that works. Do you have any like takeaways from it? Anything that like particularly stands out to you, or like things that you think maybe as an educator you would like to like convey to your students or convey a specific way?
That's a great question. I think when you said the point about the optical illusion of like different like colors looking like they're either the same or they're different just because of the way they're placed on a page, that's something that we did in our color theory class. That was the first unit. And that seems like such an exciting thing to put into like my curriculum as a teacher, because not only could it be like, oh, here's the art side of it, but once you bring in that science, it just adds a whole another layer of like, oh, this is so cool, like to your curriculum, and to get like students who might, because you might not have students who are totally engaged in art, and that's totally okay, but they might be really engaged in science, and that might be a way to get them excited about it too. So definitely.
That's awesome. One more kind of fun fact that just kind of came to my mind that I feel you would appreciate.
Yes.
Because I always think about this when I'm looking at stars, and I think about like the light that's been sent from like millions and millions of years ago, that these photons are only now reaching my eye. And I don't know the exact numbers on this. And yet there's only a portion of those photons that sends out that could hit my eye, that make it into my eye and just don't register.
Really?
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? So to me, it's like, wow, this thing sent all of these photons to my eyes. They finally made it after millions of years, and I just so happened to be situated to collect them. And some of them fall that short of actually being like registered and perceived, because they're just like hitting the wrong part of the back of your eye.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That's crazy. And now with those stars, would it be that you're only seeing 0.00035% of the light that gets shot at them because of the ultraviolet, or like?
Yes.
Yes?
You're on the right track there. So all photons have kind of the capacity to hold all of the electromagnetic spectrum. Mm-hmm. So when you think about, such as is on your shirt, perfect planning on that one, that you have a prism and it's spreading out light into all of its components. It also spreads that light out into components that you can't see. So like there's not kind of a harsh cutoff, the way that maybe the drawing on your shirt is kind of drawing it as though it's this like very distinct cutoff.
Just the rainbow.
It kind of like hazes, it's like fuzzy out on the edges out into light that you can't perceive. So it separates it out into all of its components. And so all light has the ability to be any of those types of light.
Cool.
So when you see light and you look at a thing and you're like, oh, that thing is blue, or this is black, or this is brown, that is you seeing that one very specific part of the 0.0035% that registers as that color.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? So it's a very narrow perception of color. And it's also fascinating to me because, do you know what color the sun is?
I always draw it as yellow, so I'm gonna go with my gut and say yellow.
Yeah, so sort of. Yellow is kind of how we societally perceive the sun to be. And so when you're thinking about like a kindergartner drawing a sun on their page, it's going to be yellow and it's in the corner. But the sun actually is more like a white.
Really?
Because it emits in all kinds of different colors. So stars are what we call black bodies. So it's a type of like celestial object that emits, or an object in general, that emits light across the entire wavelength. And so it's not like, it's normally a very smooth curve, and stars are kind of more of an absorption spectra for my like sciencey people that are gonna comment mean things to me. It's more of an absorption spectra because stars have atmospheres. There's like, it's a ball of gas, and so there's gas on the outside that's cooler, and therefore it will absorb parts of the light. But they're really just this like continuous spectra of light being emitted across the entire wavelength region. And you might have heard of like red giant stars. Yeah. So as stars get older and they begin to expand and they cool off, they become more red emitting. And for stars that are really hot and bright and young and they have a lot of energy, they're very blue emitting. So bluer stars are hotter and redder stars are cooler. It's kind of like if you think about flames on a stove. When they're bluer, they're hotter, and when they're red, they're cooler, even though they're all very hot.
Yeah, don't touch them.
Yeah, don't touch stars, don't touch stoves. But our sun, our star, emits light across all of these colors, and it peaks in the middle of our visible wavelengths. And the understanding of it that I have, at least, is that is not the way that we're probably thinking of it now. It's probably the other way around. It's not that the sun emits in those wavelengths because we perceive that, but rather that we perceive light the way that we do because the sun emits in those wavelengths. We have been like evolutionarily adapted to the types of light that our sun is going to emit and the types of the region of the spectrum that we can actually see because of the type of light we're getting from our sun. And therefore, we think maybe when we're looking at life outside of our solar system, the types of, and this is obviously very hypothetical, theoretical stuff now in astrobiology, but the types of species that we might find might have very different senses of color and color perception because of the stars that they're around, and their visible light portion might peak in a different region of the spectrum than what ours does.
That's so cool. That's wild. Oh, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool hypotheticals, and that's one of my favorite things in astrobiology specifically, is that you can kind of just go off on these like crazy what ifs because we don't know. And so there's nothing that's wrong. It's just ideas. So yeah, I'm really into that side of things, but I think those are all the fun facts I had about light.
Those are some fun facts. Thank you so much. And that I can come up with offhand.
But yeah. Oh, no, that's a lie. I have one more that I just came up with, and you're going to love this one.
Okay.
So in going back a little to the theme of the light just kind of missing being perceived by you, the reason that, have you ever seen like deer or raccoons, those types of animals, typically nocturnal animals, where their eyes look like they're glowing?
Yeah, it's so scary sometimes.
Very weird, right? And it's like, how do their eyes do that? Because our eyes could never emit light in that way. And it's really because their eyes, because they're used to environments where there's very little light, very few photons, they have a thing at the back of their eyes called the tapetum lucidum. And it's this like film that allows the photons a second chance to pass through their eyes to be perceived. And so it sends the photons back and then in again. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's the general idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so it gives the photons another chance to hit and actually be perceived. So they lose some of the accuracy of their vision. It's not as detailed and like you can very easily tell like there's sharp lines. And so they lose some of that accuracy in their vision to be able to pass it back a second time because it might not hit the exact right spot. And so it gets a little blurry.
Mm-hmm.
But it gives it another chance to be perceived, which means that they can see things brighter when there's fewer photons available to them. But some of those photons pass out of their eyes. And that's what you're seeing as it like emitting light.
What?
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Isn't it crazy?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Animals are so fascinating, right?
I find animals to be so cool anytime. I never even knew about that. I always just figured it was like, I don't know, they got some weird eyes or something. But wow.
And there's like obviously different types of eyes that exist in the animal kingdom. So there's like a million other things obviously there. But just like, yeah, even having the same types of eyes to just have one extra film and it does all of that.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So that's all I had for real this time about light. But yeah, I hope some of that like is cool enough that maybe it makes its way into your like typical conversations about color and stuff.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it absorbed a little bit into it.
Yeah. All right. So that actually, speaking of fun facts, does kind of perfectly segue us into our next segment, which is our segment about fun facts.
Awesome.
Yeah. So first of all, I just have to say, something that I really deeply admire about you is your like genuine interest in everything. And I think that's why like I just started on what really in my notes was just a picture of the electromagnetic spectrum and was able to come up with so many things to say because you just have this like way of being so actively engaged in the learning process. And I admire it so much. And it's because of that I actually came up with this segment originally anyway.
Aww.
So you're the reason, the inspiration behind this segment existing on the show. And it's for sure our most popular segment. So thank you for that one.
Of course, yeah.
So this one is originally created for you, with you in mind.
Okay.
So no pressure.
All right.
But this segment is our Curiosity Corner. So I'm going to tell you fun facts, and you're going to rate how mind-blowing they are on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is either it's not fun or you already knew it, and 10 is like, I'm going to think about this every day for the rest of my life, good or bad.
Awesome.
Okay? How ready do you feel?
Oh, man, I'm ready for a couple 10s to rock my world for the rest of the week.
All right. So I don't know if you're interested in dinosaurs.
They're the coolest.
Yeah. Okay. You seem like you would be interested.
Oh, yeah. I used to play with them all the time as a kid.
Yes.
Little dinosaur toys.
Yeah. I was also a dinosaur kid.
Of
so
course.
camaraderie there. So the average dinosaur lifespan was surprisingly small. The T-Rex, for example, reached its full size between 16 to 22 years old and lived to until about 27 or 33. And the largest dinosaurs, like a Brontosaurus and Diplodocus, tended to live up to maybe 39 to 53 years only.
Wow.
Right?
That's so interesting. How on earth do we know that?
So that is a question for a paleontologist. A part of it for sure is that we have like radiometric dating and all types of ways to tell how old something is in general. And then I would assume it's based on like wear and tear, how old like cells might be, things like that. I know one of the concerns about like cloning species is that the telomeres at the end of their chromosomes get really worn down. And so if you are to clone a species, like Dolly the sheep was our first like real clone, the product of that cloning is as old as a baby in terms of its like capacity for life as the cell that you took to clone it from.
Interesting.
So if Dolly the sheep is 6 years old and can live to 12, and you clone Dolly the sheep at 6 years old, the clone starts out as a baby at 6. So it has a lifespan of 6 years left.
Oh.
So I don't know, but I don't think that we've been able to, from dinosaurs, get intact cells in that way because their remains are so compacted and old and extremely dead that I don't know if we've been able to date them in that way either. But scientists have all kinds of cool, fun ways to figure out how old something is.
That's awesome.
But,
well,
yeah.
I'm definitely gonna give that a solid 7 because I've never considered the lifespan of dinos because I knew they were around 60 to 100 million years ago and more.
Yeah.
But I never thought I never knew how long they lived for. So that's awesome.
Yeah. I know, because I feel like I tend to think of them as just being like old in terms of the timeline of Earth.
Right.
And so therefore I haven't really put much thought into like how long did the average one live for. I was like, it's probably a long time. But yeah. Our next fun fact is that 99.84% of the solar system's mass is in the sun.
What?
99.84% of the solar system's mass is in the sun. That's how massive the sun is.
Wait, okay. Wait, so it's like everything else is like just light as a feather by comparison.
0.16%.
0.16%.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I thought Jupiter would be pretty up there, but in comparison to the sun,
Nothing.
that's crazy.
Now, I would imagine Jupiter is a large chunk of that 0.16%. We are probably like nothing. But yeah.
Wow. Oh man, I'm gonna give that a solid 9. That's
Yeah?
cool. That's cool.
Awesome. I have one last one. So this one is maybe one of my favorite fun facts ever.
Awesome.
I love this one. I use it all the time. There are more atoms in a grain of sand than there are grains of sand on Earth.
Sorry, I these like take a second to click for me. In a tiny little grain of sand.
Yes.
Well, how many atoms does it have?
A lot.
A lot.
More than there are grains of sand on the Earth.
Oh my goodness. Wow, sorry. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
That totally just like
Sit
that.
with it for a second.
I'm sitting with that for a sec.
Yeah.
I'm like flabbergasted.
Yeah. It's one of my favorites.
That's so crazy. Yeah. In a tiny, tiny little grain of sand. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's a 10. That's that.
Yes.
I'm gonna be sitting on that. Next time I'm at the beach, I'm gonna be like, this is nothing. This is barely any sand.
But it's so many atoms.
Right.
Yeah, isn't it like the concept of that scale of how small atoms must be in order to fit more in a grain of sand than there are grains of... I mean, think about how many beaches and like oceans the world has in order to hold so many grains of sand.
Oh
And yet
goodness.
there's more atoms in a single one of those than there are in the whole world.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for sharing that with me. I'm definitely gonna be using that.
Yeah.
I'll be like, did you know that there's more?
Yeah, that's the best part about some of these is like, and about science and maybe part of why maybe you're interested in education in general. Like, there's something so much better about having a fun fact when you share it. Like, I don't want to just sit and know that. I want everybody around me to know that, right?
Yeah, fun facts are no fun unless you share with everyone. Come on.
Hey. All right. Well, with that beautiful little rhyme, we're going to take a short break. So everybody stay tuned and we will be right back. All right, welcome back to WFNP 88.7 The Edge, Rosendale. This is continuing with Curiosities of the Cosmos. I'm your host, Allyson Sheneman, and I am joined by Joe Cartolano, a junior and student of art education at SUNY New Paltz. So for our last few minutes here, and to end every episode, I ask the guest to bring on their favorite question that they've ever been asked. So Joe, what is your favorite question?
I think that my favorite question is always the good every day-to-day question of like, how's it going? Because obviously, you get your standards, like, you're, oh, yeah, it's good. Yeah, you move on with your day. But it's always so exciting to like get like a genuine glimpse into somebody's life, because this is always like something I talk about with my girlfriend, because I'm always so like amazed by it. It's the idea that like everybody has like a unique story. Everybody comes from like a different like place. Everyone has a different like background of like every single aspect of their life, and we only get tiny glimpses into every single person. And I remember she was telling me about how it's like that's like we don't know everything in full. Like, we're not able to, like, comprehend just that massive scale because, like, our brains can't take it. It's too cool. Maybe not too cool, but I think it's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like that's such a good answer, too, for an educator to have, because you're probably going to be doing a lot of that in your career.
Oh, yeah.
Asking how students are doing and that kind of thing. I'm curious, then, when you ask that question, when you're asked that question, do you tend to find that you answer it maybe more honestly or with more detail than what most people maybe give a question like that?
That's a good question. I would say that depending on my mood, sometimes if I'm a little sleepy, a little tired, I'm good, it's good. But I try to answer that with the same level, because like it's like common courtesy thing. You don't want to be like, oh well, today I went to the store, I did this. It's like,
right, give somebody your whole life.
Yeah. But I do enjoy even just giving like a glimpse of like my personality and my story through just like, I'll be like, hey, maybe it's going groovy, like maybe it's pretty funky today, and just that little shift says a lot. And I always appreciate when people will be like, like my day, it's been like like, or finding what they're appreciative about their day, like being like, weather's great today. What could I complain about? And just knowing like all the different things that you could just like relate to with people and be like, good day today, you know?
Oh yeah, that's awesome. I feel like then, like, it's so cool to me, the idea of like, it's not just a question you like being asked, but it's a question you like to ask, and you like both like comparing your answers and other people's answers and this like insight into the way that they are. I'm also then wondering, like, when you ask that question, and I guess you kind of already have touched on this a little, but like, are you ever like disappointed when somebody's just like, it's good?
Yeah, when I would work at a grocery store over the summers, and I would get pretty bored towards like the later side of shifts because, you know, you're just sitting there beep beep beep, you know. So you get pretty tired of it. So I would try to like see what exciting answers I could get out of people that I'm like never going to see again. They're just checking out. So I'll be like, how's your day today? What have you been up to? And sometimes when they're just like, that's good. Card. You're like, like, oh man, like, because there's so much excitement that you could get out of every person, but to each their own. Sometimes people don't want to chat, and I totally respect that too. That's the extrovert in me. So
I was just about to say, because that's an introvert's dream, right? Is somebody being like, good card. That's so fascinating. Do you find that, like, I don't know, I hear that and I feel as though I kind of go back and forth between like, am I an extrovert? Am I an introvert? I think I have a little bit of qualities of both, but I refuse to be the kind of person that says I'm an ambivert. Like
an ambivert.
It's what people say when they're like, oh, like it's the same as like, oh, I'm not an optimist or a pessimist. I'm a realist. It's like, I can't be that person. Because obviously everybody's more nuanced than just like, I'm an optimist and therefore I think positively constantly and only, right? And so I feel like I don't want to say I'm an ambivert where I'm like a little extroverted, a little introverted, because I think everybody is.
For sure.
Right? But there is a part of me, I guess the introvert in me, that hears that and I'm like, I'm so jealous of the energy. Like, I feel like in the jobs that I've worked that are similar to that kind of like retail job, I just like, when I'm drained, I don't have it in me to be like, I want to learn everything that I can about these people. I'm like, when is this over?
You're watching the clock.
Yeah, and I don't feel that often with most things that I do, because I think I tend to find my way into things that I have enough passion for that I'm going to be interested in them regardless. Mm-hmm. So like I did research at Cornell this past summer, and they were asking for 40-hour work weeks, and I was on the regular doing 55, 60 hours because I just can't help myself. Like even when it was like hard and the code wasn't working and I was just like drained, I was like, I have to find a way. Like I have that like override, but I just like, I don't know, maybe it's just that like fascination with people's answers to that question where you like find that like energy. But maybe for our listeners who hear that and are like, man, I wish I like had the energy. Where do you find it?
I think that I feel like I get recharged from, and I have to be in a very specific mood. There will be days where I'll be like, all right, I'm just going to sit, I'm going to make art for 10 hours. I'm going to talk with like 2 people and have a wonderful day. And, you know, you have days like that and they're a blast and a half. Like, but I find that when I'm in a scenario where I'm like, for example, just like waiting for the time to pass and I'm like, nothing's going on. I find that I feel like I'm more recharged when I have a conversation with somebody and I learn something new about them, because it's I don't know, like I really like I don't know what the answer is or anything, but I feel like it's so just like fun to me when it's like I'm given the opportunity to chat with people and just find out new things about them, even if like I don't even know their name. Like it's all good.
That's awesome. I feel like, again, I hear that and I'm like, you're gonna make such a great teacher. Because, and maybe that's why it's better for me to do STEM and for you to teach.
Deal.
Because I feel like for me, like I have those moments and I have them like in doing this podcast or in getting up and giving presentations at a conference or for a talk or something like that. And just kind of like in general as I'm like in sciencey spaces. But when I'm like at the grocery store, my brain is off. I'm like, card. And so I feel like in order to be a teacher, you have to have that regardless of the circumstances.
Right.
Like, it doesn't matter if a kid is like getting on your nerves or is the best kid that you've ever like had in the world, or like you're having the most fascinating conversation, or this kid repeated the story to you 3 times, that you still have to have that like, that's awesome. Like, yeah.
I always say that I think one of the most important things a teacher can take when they're at college, their education classes are important and all that jazz, but I think that a theater class is really important, where you get the skills to, if you have to, act a little bit and be like, wow, that's really interesting, because it is. But sometimes if you're not at 150%, if you're maybe at 50%, like, you still have, as a teacher, you want to always give 100% to your kids, because they're still learning, and you want to make them excited about life and all the cool stuff that we're going to learn. And I think that even if you're having the sleepiest day of your life, you got to act like you're awake.
Yeah. I think that's such a great little piece of advice for like people who are maybe shy and not sure about like that side of teaching. Who I had Megan Luby, who's my girlfriend, on the show for the first episode, and she also is in education, and she talked a lot about how there's like teachers that really love the subject that they're teaching. Like maybe they're really passionate about art, but they are not interested in teaching.
Right.
And so maybe having a part of the teaching experience to be not just being able to get into your subject, but being able to really fall in love with teaching itself.
Yeah.
To have to take a theater class or to do tutoring and things like that, where you've got, and I guess maybe a part of it through like field work and those experiences, to like really have that like public speaking, having to like look stupid and be okay with it, which I think is maybe the most underrated skill to have, especially in our generation and in our lifetimes.
Oh yeah.
To be able to like look stupid and be okay with it. Like, I don't know everything and that's fine. And I think that especially in science and maybe in education also, there's this idea that we have to know everything. You have to at least pretend like you know everything. I think it scares people from asking questions.
Yeah. I always want to say, as an educator, one of my main points to give me is that there's no stupid questions, because any question's a good one, because you're going to learn something from it. Even if it's like, hey, can I go to the bathroom? Like, it's a question. But I think that with sort of that point about just, oh my goodness, sorry, I'm flustered. That's so exciting.
That's okay.
I feel like with education, it's so important to be like, and this is how I want to be as a teacher, is be like, oh, like, please call me out if I say something wrong, because I'm still learning too. Yeah. We're all still trying to figure out how to be the best student, how to be the best teacher, and that's okay. Like, and I always want to get my students' feedback to know that I'm being the best I can be to help them learn, help them be excited. It's any of those ways, but like, I'm never afraid to be in the wrong, because I'm clueless, and most of the time I am a little bit, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's like there's so much to know. How could you possibly know it all?
Exactly.
Like that, and that's one of the fun things, right? Is like having people that you know and circumstances that you're in, or like opportunities that you maybe accept and invite yourself to. Like, there's nothing forcing you to be on this podcast right now. There's no, like, you don't have to be here. I've had people say no, and that's okay. And there's nothing that is like required of you to be here. There's no reward for being here. But we're here because this is a space where you learn. Where you can share something and I learn from it, and I can share something and you'll learn from it. And to be able to like be in those places and make them safe environments, to be like, it's okay.
Yeah.
Like, we're both learning, and there's plenty of things that we both don't know anything about, and that's fine. And there's things that you know way more about than I do, and there's things that I know way more about than you do, And that's the best part of these conversations.
Yeah,
right?
and we can both learn from each other. And that's
Absolutely.
why I'm just really appreciative. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Of
It's been so
course.
fun to just learn all about these cool little science facts and just to be able to have a conversation. I think it's just so important to just be able to chat and talk about what excites us.
I feel the same way. And I thank you for coming on the show because I feel like there's not as many of those spaces that exist in a public capacity that are meant to be safe spaces to be stupid and to ask questions and to not know things and to share the cool things that you've learned. I have people who decline coming on the show because they say, well, I'm just an undergrad. I don't know enough yet. And it's you know so much. What was the point of all those classes that you took if you don't learn from them, right? So we know so much, and it's okay to not know everything and to speak on the things that you think are cool and go and learn more things and come back and speak on those things.
Yeah.
If we're searching for this moment in our lives and our careers where we finally know everything, we're never going to find it.
Yeah.
We're going to go our whole lives uncomfortable sharing what we know. And it's so unfortunate, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel that's to me one of the best things about education specifically, and doing it in whatever capacity it's in, whether it's this in a science communication type of platform. It's kind of weird historically idea of a podcast that people can tune into from wherever, and versus a more traditional sitting in a classroom with students there for the intention of learning. I don't know, just to invite more of those safe spaces.
Yeah.
To be dumb and
It's great.
to look silly.
Any opportunity to have a space where people can feel comfortable and learn is just so exciting.
Yes. Well, with that being said, that is all the time we had for today.
Already?
So thank you again for coming on the show. And of course, thank all of you for listening. This has been your host, Allyson Sheneman, and my guest,
Joseph Cartolano.
on Curiosities of the Cosmos.